Back here in the Alex Strouf Show, and we go to the phone lines now. As this is a conversation I'm very excited about, a guy that knows a lot about a lot. And I don't say that about many people, so take the compliment. It is the editor and lead writer for Dairyland Express, one of the co-hosts on one of our favorite podcasts here at the Alex Strouf Show, the Pack-A-Day podcast, and a writer for Cheesehead TV. It is a friend of mine, Paul Bretl. Paul, thanks so much for taking the time, man. Always good to chat with you.
Yeah, Alex, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Hope you're doing well.
All well on this end and back at you. I know I asked in the break, but I'll ask you again. Everybody's healthy. Everybody's good during these really, really weird times.
Yes, we are. Thank you for asking.
Of course, man. That's always good to hear. So before we dive into Packers and Brewers stuff, I got to get your reaction on this Mahomes contract. I mean, it is ginormous. 10 years, $450 million. But nobody's saying it's a bad move because it's Patrick freaking Mahomes. What was your initial takeaway from this?
Honestly, I was blown away that it was for 10 years. In today's, sports world, we're seeing, shorter contracts, even though, the 5-6 year deals, they're really only 2 or 3 years that are actually guaranteed. And I know this isn't fully guaranteed for 10, right, but that number just blew me away. Yeah. Just given it's football or life in general. So much can happen over 10 years, but I mean, he's the best quarterback in football. It's the most important position in, I think, all of sports. So I can understand why the Chiefs wanted to lock him down. I mean, Super Bowl champ, Super Bowl MVP, league MVP. Guy's a player.
Guy is a player, and like you said, 10 years it seems a little bit insane, but if you're going to lock up any guy in the National Football League for 10 years, it's probably going to be Mahomes. So definitely a fun headline to talk about in this crazy offseason. But nonetheless, let's talk some Packers. This morning you released a piece actually about Adrian Amos. You said the uber reliable Amos flies under the radar. You can find that piece at dairylandexpress.com. Paul.
So in comes Amos, and he's not, Bears fans were always quick to point it out, especially on Twitter last offseason. He's not a flashy player. He's not gonna come away with a ton of interceptions. He's probably not going to be a perennial Pro Bowler, but he brings steadiness and reliability to a position that has the word safe in it. And that's what I want. I want that at the safety position. Last year, he did a little bit of everything. He was one of the top tacklers at the safety position in all of football in terms of, missed tackles. He had some of the fewest amounts. He was just a sure tackler overall. He was top 5 in pass breakups, in total pressures. Like I said, he just did a little bit of everything for this defense. And I think that because those stats aren't what people are going to remember at the end of the day, we're not going to remember, how many tackles did someone have or necessarily a pass breakup unless it comes, at a very key moment. But it's those plays added together over the course of the game that help the team secure the win. And so I said the last part that I said was his contributions, they fly under the radar, but they shouldn't be underappreciated because he's a huge part of this defense. And I think I'm expecting him to take a step forward this year, just as I am a number of those guys, Darius Smith as well, and the whole defensive unit. Because for Amos, it's year 2 in Mike Pettine's system. He was new to it last year, and he mentioned when he was on his Zoom call with reporters a few weeks ago that things are clicking faster for him because now he's just more familiar with it. So I'm expecting big things from him once again. And like I said, maybe that doesn't mean 6 interceptions, but that reliability and that steadiness. And that's a great guy to have next to Darnell Savage. Yeah. You got Savage, who's a roamer. He's that playmaker. And so if you got kind of the steady Amos and then Savage, who can run around making plays, that's a great 1-2 punch that the Packers have on the back end.
Really well said. Paul Bretl is my guest here on the Alex Strouf Show. And Paul, let's stick with that defensive backfield. Kevin King, obviously entering a contract year, led the team in interceptions a year ago. Year 2, again, you mentioned, or really year 3, I think, for King in this system. But what do you expect for him? Can he duplicate what he did a year ago, especially in a contract year?
I think he can, as long as he's healthy. He needs to become more consistent. But I think the Packers are in a really, really tricky spot with him.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're all well aware that next offseason they have 5 big free agents: Clark, Bakhtiari, King, Aaron Jones, and Corey Linsley.
Mm-hmm.
Jamal Williams can be in there as well. And they don't have a ton of cap space. Last year we saw them make the 4 big signings. This year they kind of went more bargain hunting. next offseason is going to be much of the same. We hope that, on my list, it's get Clark, get Bakhtiari, and anything after that's gravy. So we're not going to see any of those big signings. But with King, the injury history is there. He had a nice season last year. And if he can continue to prove on that in 2020, I think that he might price himself out of the Packers' price range.
And Paul,
just with that type of production. Go on.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, with that type of production, he was second in the league in interceptions. If he can get a little more consistency, I don't know what the Packers are going to be able to bring him back. So that's where the tough spot is. Because one option, and I know Clark and Bakhtiari take precedent, but they could potentially look into a contract extension before the season begins or even early on.
Yeah.
And what that's going to do is lock him in at a lower price than what he could get next offseason. But obviously, there's some risk involved. I mean, he only played in 15 of his first 32 games over those first 2 years. So if the injury bug bites again, well, all of a sudden, the Packers are in a rock and a hard place because they paid him already. But they've also invested a lot of draft capital into this position. I mean, we look at past years, Demarius Randall, Quentin Rollins, Jair Alexander in round 1, Josh Jackson in round 2, Kevin King in round 2. And if King is gone next year, it almost feels like they have to go spend more draft capital, high draft capital, premium draft capital on that position again, because we don't know what's going to happen with Josh Jackson. Chandon Sullivan had a really nice season. We hope he can duplicate it, but still remains to be seen. Kadar Holman, I'm a huge fan of, but once again, still remains to be seen. So there could be question marks going into the cornerback position once again. But to answer your question, as long as King's healthy, I expect him to build off of last year.
Yeah, and like I said at the top, man, you know a lot about a lot, so I appreciate the insight. Paul Bretl, my guest. Last week, Paul, you put out a tweet that I actually referenced on the show, and that was, how would you rank those 5 free agents after the 2020 season that you just brought up? And it sounded like you ranked your top 2, Bakhtiari and Clark. Are those really the 2 main priorities in your eyes for Green Bay long term?
Yeah, I think it has to be. Clark, he's developed into one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league, and he's 24 years old. I mean, theoretically, his best years are still ahead of him. Packers have to do whatever they can to lock him up. I call him and Bakhtiari 1A and 1B. If I'm absolutely forced to pick who I'd put at the top of that list, I'd put Clark just because of his age. But Bakhtiari plays the all-important left tackle position, covers Rodgers, and, if he's re-signed, Love's eventually blindside. There's just aren't positions that can be ignored, especially with those players who are 2 of the best in the league. And if I were to continue ranking, I would put Kevin King number 3. Cornerback's another premier position, and if he continues to develop like I think he will, that's a great guy to have next to Jair Alexander. Like I said, a 1-2 punch at cornerback. And then after that, I'd put Aaron Jones, although that's highly dependent on what the price tag is. Mm-hmm. We've seen that NFL teams don't have to pay running backs to be successful.
No.
And if the Packers could agree to an extension with Jones, and I keep using that word, and they're just not going to have enough money to sign, all 5 of those guys I mentioned. They're going to have to pick and choose. But if Jones would agree to perhaps an Austin Eckler deal, which was in the $6-7 million per year range, that's a lot more reasonable than what he's being projected at in the $13-14 million range. If that's the case, I just don't see how he's going to be back.
Yeah.
And then and then on number 5, I would have Corey Linsley. Yeah. I think that the Packers are, they have Lucas Patrick. They drafted Jake Hansen. I know he's a 6th rounder, but at one point, Corey Linsley was a rookie 5th rounder starting week 1 in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And so obviously that doesn't mean that Hansen's going to turn out to be Linsley level, but we've seen the Packers, not necessarily bring in a high premium draft pick and take over. So that would be the kind of the order that I have as far as who I would want to be re-signed. But like I said, I think right now it's 2 of them. And if they can get a 3rd, I mean, kudos to Russ Ball and Goody and everyone involved.
Before we move on from the Packers, Paul, I want to ask about this running back room. Obviously, bringing in A.J. Dillon was a little bit of a shocker, but now it's starting to make a little bit more sense as these contractual things really come to light with Jones and Williams. What do you think that running back room is going to look like, and rotation really is going to look like in 2020?
Well, Jones is going to be running back 1. And whether or not it's right away, Dillon, is going to be getting running back 2 snaps.
Oh, wow.
We know that it's not, the position isn't as valued. It's been devalued over the years, both, in the contracts that they receive, but also in where they're drafted. I mean, the Packers were absolutely ripped apart. And Aaron Jones is a prime example of this. He was a 5th rounder. But the Packers didn't spend the 62nd pick for Jones to sit on the side, or for A.J. Dillon to sit on the sideline.
Right.
He's going to play. He's going to get snaps. And Jamal Williams is just a solid, well-rounded back, pass catcher, runner, pass blocker. He does it all. But Dillon gives them another explosive back out of the backfield, someone who can rip off those big plays. That's not really Williams' forte. And the combination of him and Jones on the field, or Dillon in the backfield and Aaron Jones out in the slot, I think Jones will see him out wide more this year, because you have an explosive runner in the backfield like Dillon to complement with him. So Jones is going to be one. Dillon, I think, is going to end up, whether how long it takes, but I think he's going to end up overtaking Williams for those RB2 snaps, because Dillon and Jones on the field, just with their explosiveness and playmaking ability, home run ability that they each have, it's a nice combo.
Paul Bretl is my guest, at Paul_Bretl on Twitter for all of his great stuff. Also at DairylandExpress.com. Let's switch gears now, Paul, over to the Brewers side of things. Their schedule obviously released this week. And you wrote a piece, 7 quick takeaways from the 2020 schedule. I'm not going to have you rattle off all 7, but what's kind of the big takeaway from this schedule release? Anything we should really be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so the big thing to start is the first 7 games are going to be on the road. And I know this year's different. There's not the fans, that they have to contend with. So home field advantage probably isn't going to be as, big of a factor as it usually is. But that's still 7 games away from Miller Park. And in a 60-game season, a losing streak or a rough stretch, obviously it's going to carry way more impact than over a 162-game season. And I think getting off to a good start is more important now than it would be in normal circumstances. So that's one thing to look for. Other piece that I'll point out is in September, they have a nice home stretch where they play 9 games in 10 days at Miller Park, and they also have 4 off days, with 3 of them coming on Thursdays. We remember back to 2018 when they went on that incredible hot streak, ended up tying the Cubs, beating the Cubs in game 163. Mm-hmm. They had every Thursday off that month. There might not be a better manager in baseball, better than Craig Counsell, who knows how to manipulate the off days in his team's favor. So they have 4 in September, including 3 Thursdays. So I think that'll be key as well down the stretch.
Our Twitter poll today, Paul, is a prediction of how many games the Brewers can realistically win in the 60-game schedule. I'm going to put you on the spot. Obviously, I know it's hard to just take a wild guess, but could you give me a ballpark number of what you think is a realistic expectation for the win count for the Brewers in that 60 games?
Yeah, I did see your poll. If I had to guess, maybe, 32 and 28, 33 and 27, 31 and 29. I see them being somewhere in that ballpark. I think that this shortened season really plays into their favor. The DH is coming to the NL. That means, in theory, more Ryan Braun, because they're not going to have to rest him as much. Someone like Logan Morrison, he hit 37, 38 home runs back in 2017. That's another DH candidate. Their depth in the pitching rotation. They have their starting 5, or they have the 4 guys locked in, but then there's guys like Eric Lauer, Corbin Burns, Freddie Peralta. So they have 7 guys there. They have a nice bullpen. Knebel's back and healthy. We'll see how they ease him into things, but he's going to be pitching. Josh Hader, and then just all the bats that they have and the defensive versatility. I think all that plays really well into their favor, but there's still question marks too. A lot of fans were upset with how this offseason went. We saw Moose go, we saw Grandal go, and their place were, a lot of platoons. Eric Sogard, Jed Jerko at third base. How are they going to perform? That's a big question mark. And guys like Justin Smoke, coming off a down season, but the underlying numbers show that he performed better than maybe what his slash line did. So there's still a lot of question marks, especially offensively with the bats and even in the rotation as well. So while I think that everything plays, or a lot of these new factors play into their favor this season, there's still, those unknowns. So I don't expect them to run away with the Central by any means, because, that's going to be a brutal division as it is. Everyone's going to be competing for the title outside the Pirates.
Absolutely. Always a tough division. One more for you, Paul, at Paul_Bretl on Twitter, if you want to follow along with all of his great work. And this is one I've been asking every NFL guest for the last couple of weeks. I'm putting you on the spot. It's a way too early prediction, but what is your way too early prediction for the 2020 NFL most valuable player? Anybody come to mind when I ask that?
Yeah, and we've already talked about him. I mean, I gotta go Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
So we know that, and I hope that's not a cop out answer, but that's my safe answer as well. I think the Chiefs are, they hardly lost anyone from last year to begin with. Like I said, Mahomes is the best, quarterback in the league right now. It's an award that goes towards quarterbacks. So the best quarterback on potentially the best team making another Super Bowl push. I mean, I think it just points to him.
It's not a cop-out answer because I think it might be just the best one overall. Paul, really appreciate the time. You stay healthy, and we'll do it again soon. All right, my friend?
Thank you. Appreciate it, Alex.
That is Paul Bretl, who is the editor and writer for DairylandExpress.com. Really great stuff. That's part of the Fansided and Time Inc. network. You can find all of his stuff at Paul_Bretl on Twitter.